The millionaire's children were so mischievous that they scared every nanny away. But when the new maid arrived, no one expected what she would do, and it completely changed the lives of everyone in the mansion forever. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because when you stop doing this, YouTube understands that you don't like this content and stops recommending good stories like this. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We'd love to know that. Amara held the large, steaming platter of spaghetti with a practiced ease, her movements graceful despite the fatigue that settled in her bones after a long day. A warm, genuine smile touched her lips, a stark contrast to the weariness in her eyes. The scent of tomato and basil filled the bright dining room, a comforting aroma that cut through the silent anticipation of the children seated at the long, polished table. They were the children of the mansion, their faces scrubbed clean, their light blue clothes and white aprons starched and perfect. They watched her, a chorus of eager, young faces, their eyes wide with hunger and polite excitement. Her gaze swept over them, a momentary tally of who was where, and then it found her. Tucked between the boisterous blonde boy and the quiet girl with braids was 8-year-old Nia, her daughter. Unlike the others, Nia's simple dress was slightly worn, the color faded from too many washes. Her curly hair, tied in 2 tight pigtails, seemed a little wilder than the neatly combed locks of the other children. A quiet, shy pride emanated from her, a mixture of being seen and wanting to disappear. She was a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the picture, and Amara's heart swelled with a fierce protective love. The other children knew who Nia was, the maid's daughter, but at this table, under the soft daylight streaming through the tall windows, they were all just children waiting to eat. Amara slid the first plate piled high with pasta in front of the little girl with braids. She gave a small nod and moved on, her mind momentarily drifting to the dinner she would prepare later for herself and Nia in their small, cozy room on the 3rd floor. Would Nia want the rest of the stew from yesterday? Or maybe they could treat themselves to some roasted potatoes, a fleeting moment of peace amidst the constant hum of her duties. The dining room, with its pristine white walls and elegant wainscoting, felt both like a stage and a cage. Amara was the lead actress, performing her role with flawless precision. She served the pasta, 1 plate at a time, each motion a part of the grand choreography of her life here. She heard the soft clink of a fork on a plate, the low murmur of the children's voices, the subtle rustle of their aprons. Her focus was absolute. She knew every crack in the wainscoting, every intricate detail of the chandelier, every angle of the light. She had memorized this room the way a sailor memorizes the stars. It was her world, a world of silent service and constant motion. The children began to eat, their initial polite restraint quickly dissolving into the joyful, messy business of consuming spaghetti. Amara watched Nia subtly lift a strand of pasta to her mouth, her small, shy face a picture of pure contentment. Nia's presence at this table was a rare concession, a brief moment of humanity granted by the master of the house, a man who, despite his immense wealth, seemed to have an unusual understanding of a mother's heart. He had seen the way Amara's face lit up when she spoke of her daughter, the way her shoulders seemed to relax only in Nia's company. He had said, in his quiet, understated way, that a child should not have to eat alone. And so, here she was, a quiet yet profound disruption. Nia, a silent echo of Amara's own life, sat at a table she cleaned every day in a room she maintained with tireless effort. The other children, with their porcelain doll complexions, were oblivious to the emotional chasm that lay between them. They were simply kids, enjoying dinner, but for Amara, the sight was a constant reminder of the 2 worlds she inhabited. The world of servitude, where she was the maid, and the world of motherhood, where she was simply Mom. This room was where those two worlds collided in the most intimate and public of ways. A small sigh escaped her. She had to finish serving and then retreat to the kitchen, leaving Nia to navigate this temporary social landscape alone. It was a familiar ritual of separation, a small pain she felt every time she had to leave her daughter to attend to her duties. She placed the last plate on the table, a gentle gesture that held an unspoken farewell. Her work at the table was done for now. She straightened up, smoothed her apron, and prepared to recede into the shadows, a ghost in her own life's narrative. As she turned, her eyes met his. He stood in the doorway, a wealthy man in an elegant navy blue suit, a silhouette framed by the light of the hallway behind him. Mr. Caldwell, the man whose world she tended, the man who owned this house, these children, and in a way, her time. His expression was difficult to read, a flicker of surprise, a hint of conflict. He watched the scene at the table, his gaze fixed on the happy children, the smiling maid, and most of all the small, shy girl who sat among them. He was an observer, a silent audience to the emotional drama unfolding in his own dining room, a drama he had inadvertently orchestrated. Amara moved around the large dining table with practiced efficiency, clearing the empty plates with a quiet grace that had become second nature. The children, their initial hunger sated, were now engaged in soft chatter, their faces flushed with the contentment of a good meal. Nia, her daughter, still sat quietly, picking at the last strands of spaghetti on her plate, her dark eyes occasionally darting around the room with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Amara's gaze lingered on her for a fleeting moment, a silent reassurance before she stacked the plates carefully, her movements economical and precise. Years of service had honed her every action, transforming mundane tasks into a form of quiet artistry. As she reached for a stray napkin near where Nia sat, her eyes flicked towards the doorway. Mr. Caldwell stood there, as he often did, a silent observer of the evening. Rituals within his grand home. But tonight there was a stillness about him, an intensity in his gaze that made Amara pause. His usual detached air seemed to have dissipated, replaced by something akin to shock, or perhaps recognition. His eyes were fixed not on the boisterous children, nor on the remnants of the meal, but on Nia. Amara's heart gave a sudden sharp thump against her ribs. She had grown accustomed to Mr. Caldwell's polite indifference, his almost invisible presence as she went about her duties. He was a fixture of the mansion, a man of wealth and quiet authority. But rarely did he truly see her, or so she had believed. Tonight felt different. His gaze held a weight, a scrutiny that made the familiar room feel suddenly charged with an unspoken tension. She watched him, her movements faltering for a fraction of a second. His brow was furrowed, his lips slightly parted, as if he were trying to grasp a fleeting memory. It was the way he was looking at Nia, a focused, almost bewildered stare that sent a shiver of unease down Amara's spine. Nia, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding across the room, continued to twirl a lone strand of spaghetti around her fork. Then Mr. Caldwell shifted slightly, his gaze narrowing. Amara followed his line of sight, her breath catching in her throat. He was looking at Nia's profile, the delicate curve of her cheek, the slight upturn of her nose, the way her dark, curly hair framed her face. It was a familiar sight to Amara, the beloved image of her daughter that she carried in her heart every moment of every day. But in Mr. Caldwell's intense scrutiny, she saw something else, something unsettling. A sudden, sharp intake of breath escaped Mr. Caldwell. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes still locked on Nia. Amara's hand tightened on the stack of plates she held, her knuckles turning white. A cold dread began to creep into her consciousness. What was it about Nia that had captured his attention so completely? It wasn't just curiosity. It was something deeper, something that seemed to have shaken him to his very core. His gaze flickered from Nia's face to her small hands, then back again, his expression a complex tapestry of surprise, confusion, and something else. Something akin to grief, or perhaps a long-buried memory resurfacing with unexpected force. Amara's mind raced, trying to decipher the unspoken message in his eyes. Had he noticed how different Nia was from the other children? Was he questioning her presence at the table? Or was it something more profound, something that connected her daughter to his seemingly untouchable world in a way Amara could not comprehend? The silence in the dining room stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the soft clinking of silverware as the children finished their meal. Amara stood frozen, a stack of dirty plates clutched against her chest, her heart pounding in her ears. Mr. Caldwell remained in the doorway, his gaze unwavering, his features etched with a dawning realization. Then his lips moved slightly, forming a word that Amara couldn't quite discern from across the room. But the intensity in his eyes, the shock that had settled on his face, spoke volumes. He had seen something in Nia, something that resonated with a past he had perhaps tried to bury. A ghost of a memory, a forgotten face, now brought vividly back to life by the presence of a small, shy girl sitting at his dining table. His heart, a muscle he had long believed to be dormant, clenched with a sudden, unexpected pang. He knew that he knew those eyes. He just couldn't place them, not yet. But the unsettling familiarity was undeniable. The first few minutes after the plates were served were a flurry of happy chaos. The children, their appetites keen, attacked the mounds of spaghetti with gusto, their laughter and excited chatter filling the otherwise quiet room. They slurped and giggled, their faces smeared with red sauce, the very picture of youthful abandon. But a few seats down, a single small figure ate with a quiet reverence that set her apart. When the spoon of spaghetti reached Nia's lips, her expression shifted. A flicker of something profound and soft passed over her face, a look of pure, unadulterated nostalgia. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, savoring the flavor. From the doorway, Mr. Caldwell watched, his eyes fixed on the girl. He saw the change in her demeanor, the way a simple plate of food seemed to transport her, and in that moment he felt a jolt of his own, a powerful echo from a distant past. He leaned against the doorframe, a word escaping his lips in a near-silent murmur. "This food reminds me of someone." Amara, still clearing the last remnants from the table, caught his words. Her movements, already quiet, slowed to a near halt. She had been watching the scene unfold from the periphery, her heart a tangled mix of pride and worry. She watched her daughter eat, a small smile on Nia's face that was rarely seen outside of their shared moments. Amara knew that smile. It was the smile Nia wore when she talked about a story, or a special song, or the way the sun felt on her skin. It was a smile of pure, uncomplicated joy. To see it here in this grand, imposing room was a small miracle. But then she heard his words, and a cold wave of apprehension washed over her. Mr. Caldwell stood still, his gaze 100 miles away, lost in a memory the food had triggered. Sounds of the children faded for him. The room's elegant walls dissolved, and he was a young man again, a world away from the trappings of wealth and success. He was in a small, cramped apartment, the scent of garlic and tomatoes clinging to the air like a warm blanket. He saw a woman, her back to him, humming a tune as she stirred a pot on the stove. Her hair was pulled back, a few stray curls escaping to frame her neck. He remembered the feeling of coming home to that smell, that sound, that sight. It was the taste of comfort, of unconditional love, of a life he had left behind in his relentless pursuit of ambition. For years he had buried that part of himself. He had built an empire on the foundations of ambition and cold logic. He had traded a simple life for a complex one, a warm home for a grand house, a loving partnership for solitude. The memories had become a dull ache, a distant dream that he had told himself was a necessary sacrifice. He had believed he had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen, truly loved, truly home. But this spaghetti, this simple, ordinary meal, had torn through the veil of years and brought it all flooding back. The taste on Nia's tongue, the fleeting look of nostalgia, was a mirror of his own forgotten heart. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the elegant navy suit feeling suddenly heavy on his shoulders. The memory was not just of the woman, but of the effortless happiness they had shared. He had been a different man then, open and vulnerable. The man who stood here now was a stranger to that younger version of himself, a person who had learned to lock his feelings away behind a wall of politeness and detached observation. He had been proud of that wall, had built it with care and precision, but now a little girl's expression and a familiar flavor had chipped away at a corner of it. Amara, a silent sentinel by the table, felt the weight of his gaze and the gravity of his words. She knew this man. She knew the way he carried his wealth, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, lonely burden. She had seen him in moments of unguarded solitude, staring out of windows, his face a canvas of something she could only guess at. Now she understood. He was a man haunted by a ghost, and her daughter, with a simple plate of food, had managed to make that ghost feel real again. She wanted to retreat, to disappear, to protect the innocent moment from the man's complicated past, but she couldn't. She was a fixture of the room, just as he was. He was still staring at Nia, who was now smiling to herself, lost in her own private world of flavor and memory. He saw not just a child, but a reflection of a life he had. Abandoned. The food was a bridge, a fragile, unexpected link between his past and his present, between a memory and a little girl he barely knew. The realization was a punch to the gut, a sudden, visceral reminder of a love he had forsaken. He had always thought of his past as a closed book, its pages turned and forgotten. But now it seemed a single chapter had been reopened, and it was all because of a taste. He felt a profound, unsettling loneliness, a sudden emptiness that the grand dining room could never fill. He finally tore his gaze away from Nia, his eyes settling on Amara for a brief moment before he turned and walked away. He had to be alone to process this strange, powerful memory that had so unexpectedly resurfaced. He had to understand what it meant, what this profound connection was. He had whispered the words to himself, a private thought made public. He had to know who this food reminded him of. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the girl. Her small hands gripped the fork with a focused intensity, a little finger lifted just so, in a way he hadn't seen in over 2 decades. Her expression, utterly serious as she meticulously gathered the last strands of pasta, was a perfect miniature echo of a face he had tried to erase from his mind. It was impossible. The years had passed, the memories had faded, but this child, this quiet girl at his table, was an undeniable phantom of his past. He stood frozen in the doorway, the sounds of the dining room blurring into a distant hum. A single, breathy whisper escaped his lips. Impossible. She was just a baby. The words hung in the air, unheard by anyone but him, yet their weight was crushing. He felt the polished wood of the doorframe beneath his hand, a solid anchor in a world that had suddenly tilted. This wasn't just a resemblance anymore. It was an exact, breathtaking replication. He saw it in the way her brows furrowed in concentration, in the precise, delicate way she chewed her food, even in the slight tilt of her head when she listened to the other children talk. Every small gesture was a jarring, painful recall. He remembered a woman, her face a softer version of this child's. her eyes holding the same deep intelligence. He had met her in a different life, one before the suits and the mansions, a life filled with ambition and naive hope. She had a way of holding her fork that was uniquely hers, a small, elegant quirk that had charmed him instantly. He had watched her for hours, fascinated by the way she moved, the quiet dignity that radiated from her. He had loved that dignity. It was one of the many things he had lost when he chose another path. And now, here it was again, right in front of him. In the small, shy person of Nia, he had told himself that the familiar taste of the food was a coincidence, a trick of the mind. He had convinced himself that his memory of her mother was simply a ghost, an echo in his mind that would fade with time. But this was different. This was concrete. Physical evidence. This was the past, walking and breathing, sitting at his own dinner table. It was a cruel irony, a cosmic joke that the past he had so painstakingly buried would return to him in the form of a child he saw every day. A sudden wave of guilt, hot and sharp, washed over him. He had convinced himself that his life was better this way, that the sacrifices he had made were for a greater good. He had built an empire, gained immense power, and lived a life of unimaginable luxury. But seeing this child, a silent, living reminder of what he had left behind, he felt nothing but a profound, gut-wrenching emptiness. The trophies of his success felt like worthless trinkets, and his grand house felt like a cage. He had promised her mother all those years ago that he would return. He had said he needed to make a name for himself, to build a future worthy of her. He had left. With a heavy heart, but a clear purpose, a plan to conquer the world and return victorious. But the world had a way of changing you. The years turned into a decade into two, and the calls became less frequent, then stopped entirely. The memory of her voice became a whisper, her face a blur. He had told himself that he had no choice, that his destiny was larger than a small, quiet life. But now, looking at Nia, he knew he had made a terrible mistake. He had sacrificed the most important thing for an illusion of power. He saw Amara moving quietly around the room, her face etched with a silent concern he couldn't quite decipher. She was a constant presence in his life, a figure he had taken for granted, much like the furniture or the paintings. But he had never really seen her, not until now. He looked at the gentle way she stacked the plates, the protective way she glanced at Nia, and a new, unsettling thought began to form in his mind. He didn't know the maid, not truly. He didn't know her story. He knew nothing of the life she led outside of these walls. And he knew even less about the child who was now sitting at his table, a living reminder of a past he had left behind. His heart, which he had long believed was dormant, was pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt a sharp, almost physical ache of regret. The past wasn't just a memory, it was a ghost with a name, a family, and a quiet, dignified presence. He had to know. He had to understand. He had to find out how this child, this impossible reflection of a love he had abandoned, had come to be in his home. His perfect, ordered world was collapsing around him, and he was powerless to stop it. He could only watch the small, serious girl at his table and whisper the words he had been trying to deny. Impossible, she was just a baby. The grand dining room faded away. The sounds of the children's laughter became a distant echo. The image of the little girl, Nia, morphed and shifted, her face blurring into another, older face he had spent decades trying to forget. A wave of painful memories, sharp and vivid, washed over Mr. Caldwell, pulling him from the elegant present into a past he had left behind, in a rush of ambition and naive hope. Flashbacks took over his mind, a relentless montage of a life he had once led. He saw her, a young woman with a spirit as vibrant as her eyes were deep. He saw their apartment, small, and filled with the scent of her cooking, the sound of her humming. And then he saw the final scene, the last time he saw her. A tense, tearful goodbye. He had promised to come back for her, to return a success. She had listened, her face a mixture of pride and unspoken sadness, a quiet secret hidden. In her eyes that he never understood. She vanished, taking with her a part of him he never got back, and a secret that was never revealed. The images came in a rush, a film playing only for him. He was a young man, driven by a fierce desire to prove himself, to build a name and a fortune. He had met her in a small university town, a kind, brilliant woman who saw past his ambition to the vulnerable man beneath. She was his anchor, the one person who understood his restless nature and loved him anyway. He remembered the long nights of studying, her bringing him coffee and a quiet smile. He remembered the first time he told her about his dreams of a career in the city, of the financial world and its dizzying promise. Her smile had wavered, a flash of something unreadable in her eyes. It was a premonition he had been too young and too foolish to heed. He remembered the day he left. The small, crowded bus station, the lingering smell of exhaust fumes and rain. He had held her close, promising to call, to write, to never forget. He had been so sure of himself, so confident that their love was strong enough to bridge any distance, any amount of time. Her goodbye had been gentle, but her grip on his hand was impossibly tight. "There's something I need to tell you," she had started, her voice barely a whisper. But the bus had called out its final boarding, and he had pulled away, telling her he'd call her that night. He had convinced himself that whatever it was, it could wait. He had boarded the bus, waving to her as she stood alone on the platform. He never saw her again. He had called, of course, that night and the next, and the next. The phone had rung unanswered. He wrote letters, their words filled with love and promises, but they were all returned, marked address unknown. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. He had hired private investigators, spent thousands of dollars, but the answers were always the same. She was gone. Her family had moved. Her friends had lost touch. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. The shock had been immense then. The grief, and finally, a cold, hard resolve to forget. He had channeled all his pain into his career, building a fortress of success around a hollowed-out heart. He had told himself that she had left him, that she had chosen to disappear, that the secret was simply her way of cutting ties. He had buried the love and the mystery, convinced that he would never find the answers. But he had never been able to forget the look on her face, that quiet, knowing sadness. He had always known there was something she had been about to tell him, something that was so important it could not be said over. The phone. He had carried that question with him for 20 years, a heavy, unspoken burden. He had told himself it was about his career, about his choice to leave, something small and selfish. He had never dared to consider anything else. Now, standing in his own doorway, the scent of spaghetti and the sight of a little girl's face had ripped open the old wound. Nia's expression, her movements, her quiet dignity, they were all a living, breathing testament to the woman he had loved. The similarities were too profound to be a coincidence. They were a sign, a clue, a secret he was now forced to confront. The secret she had never revealed to him, the secret he had been too afraid to face. His mind replayed the last scene over and over again, her hand in his, her lips parted, a confession on the tip of her tongue. He could almost hear her voice, almost feel her touch. The memory was so real, so powerful, it brought him to his knees. He had to know. He had to find out the truth, a truth that had been hidden from him for 2 long decades, a truth that was now staring at him from across his dinner table. He closed his eyes, and the dining room returned. The children were still laughing. Amara was still moving quietly, clearing the last plates. But the world had changed. The past was no longer buried. It was here, in his house, and it had a name. It was a small, quiet girl, a walking, breathing secret that had been kept from him for years, and it was all tied to the young woman he had loved, who had disappeared, taking with her a secret that was never revealed. The children had been sent to the sitting room for a movie, their chatter replaced by the soft hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. The mansion was quieter now, a silence that felt heavier than the earlier noise. Mr. Caldwell stood in the middle of his study, the room's rich mahogany and leather, feeling suddenly sterile and cold. He had sent a polite yet firm message to Amara through the butler. He needed to speak with her. When she entered the study, she was still in her light blue uniform, her face a mask of calm professionalism. He closed the door behind her, the click of the lock a final, irreversible sound. He turned to face her, his hands clasped behind his back, his body language rigid with tension. He had planned to be a man of authority, of cold, hard facts, but when he opened his mouth, his voice, so accustomed to command, betrayed him. It trembled as he asked, "Who is that girl?" She tried to deflect, her mouth opening to offer a polite, rehearsed answer, but her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, betrayed the truth. Amara froze. She had expected this. The moment she saw the look on his face in the doorway, a look of profound recognition, she knew her carefully. Constructed world was about to fall apart. For years, she had worked in this house, a ghost in the machine, a silent presence. She had built a life here, a small, safe one for her and Nia, away from the prying eyes and the painful memories of the past. Her greatest fear had always been that her two worlds would collide, and now they had. The question hung in the air between them, a fragile, explosive thing. She took a breath, trying to summon the professional distance that had been her shield for so long. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not sure what you mean." The lie felt brittle, a fragile glass wall. She was trying to build between herself and the truth. But Mr. Caldwell didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her, his expression a complicated mix of hope and desperation. Don't do that, Amara," he said, her name a quiet command. "I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking as a man who needs to know. Who is she?" Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She saw the truth reflected in his eyes, the memory of a woman he had loved, the ghost of a past he had left behind, the dawning realization of a truth he had been too afraid to consider. He wasn't seeing her anymore. He was seeing the past in her eyes. It was a silent, agonizing dance, a confrontation not of words, but of souls. She wanted to deny it, to pretend, to protect the delicate secret that was her daughter's life. But she couldn't, not when he was looking at her like that, as if a lifetime of questions was resting on her shoulders. "She's my daughter, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I know that," he said, his voice a low, pained growl. "But who is she? Tell me the name of her father." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations and a profound need for an answer. Amara looked at him, and for the first time in years she saw the boy he once was, the boy she had known, the one who had promised her everything and left her with nothing. He was still in there, buried beneath layers of wealth and power, but he was there. His eyes were wide with a desperate, unspoken plea. He wasn't asking for a name, he was asking for a truth that had haunted him for 20 years. She had to tell him, not with words, but with a silent, agonizing admission. She thought of Nia, of the small, shy pride on her face. She thought of the life she had built for them, a life of quiet dignity and hard work. She had done it all for Nia, to give her a chance at a world that was so very different from her own. And now this man, this ghost from the past, was threatening to tear it all down. But he was a part of Nia's story too, a part she had tried to erase, a part she had tried to forget. She couldn't hide it anymore. He deserved to know. He deserved to see the truth that was standing in front of him, the truth that was living in his own house. Her eyes met his, and she saw the dawning horror in his face. She didn't need to say a word. The secret was there, in the quiet, unspoken language of her gaze. Her eyes, filled with a lifetime of pain, love, and a quiet, dignified anger, revealed everything. Amara's eyes, a mirror to a lifetime of unspoken truths, held his gaze. A profound and painful sadness settled on her face, but with it, a steely resolve he had never seen before. She took a slow, deliberate breath, and the words that followed were a quiet, devastating bomb. "She is my daughter," Amara said, her voice a low, steady current in the silent room. "But she also carries your blood." The confession hung in the air, a final, irreversible declaration. Mr. Caldwell's world, built on a foundation of control and logic, shattered into a million pieces. He stood frozen, his face a mask of a profound shock, his mind reeling from the impossible, undeniable truth. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of 20 years of buried secrets. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He could only stare at her, the woman who had lived in his house, cooked his meals, and raised his daughter under his very roof. The irony, the betrayal, the sheer unimaginable cruelty of it all was a punch to the gut. The face of the woman he had loved, the face of the daughter he had never known, they all converged in a dizzying spiral. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of grief, a profound sense of what had been lost, of a life he never knew he could have had. Amara finally broke the silence. "I was going to tell you that day," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, dignified pain. "At the bus station, I found out a week before. I was going to tell you I was pregnant. But you were so excited to leave, so ready to start your new life. I couldn't. I was afraid you would stay out of obligation, that you would resent me and the baby. I wanted you to go and pursue your dreams without a burden." His mind reeled. He remembered the look on her face, the words she had started to say. It all made a terrible, heartbreaking sense now. The secret she had tried to tell him wasn't about a breakup or a goodbye. It was about a beginning, his beginning. And he had been too selfish, too foolish, too blinded by ambition to listen. He had left her, believing he was coming back. For her, but she had disappeared. "Why?" he managed to choke out, the word raw with emotion. "Why did you leave? Why did you hide?" "I didn't have a choice," Amara said, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. "My family moved, and I went with them. I was alone, and I had to find a way to provide for my baby. I couldn't risk you finding out and taking her from me, so I went on with my life. It was hard, but I did it. I promised myself I would give her a better life." He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the years of hard work etched into her face, the quiet strength that had allowed her to raise a child on her own. He saw the woman who had cooked his meals and cleaned his house and raised his child without a word of complaint. A bitter, cold rage began to build inside him, not at her, but at himself. He had spent his life chasing ghosts, building an empire, while the real treasure, the real love, was living in his house all along. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, his voice low, his anger a cold, controlled thing. 8 years, she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw your name in a magazine, and I knew you were close. I needed a job, and I thought it would be a way to keep an eye on you, to see the man you had become. I never intended for this to happen. I never thought you would notice her." He was speechless. For 8 years he had been living with his daughter and her mother, and he had been completely oblivious. He had been so consumed with his own life, his own success, that he had failed to see the most important thing right under his nose. He had been a man of wealth and power, But he had been blind. He looked at her again, and his gaze softened. "She is beautiful, Amara," he said. The words are raw, painful. "Confession. She looks like us." Amara nodded, a small, sad smile on her face. "She does. She has your mind, too. She's so smart, so curious, and she has my heart. She is a good girl." He wanted to reach out and touch her, to comfort her, but the chasm between them was too wide, too deep. He had hurt her, and he had hurt his daughter without even knowing it. He had a lifetime of missed moments, of birthdays and first words and scraped knees, and he would never get them back. He felt a profound, all-consuming emptiness, a void that his wealth and power could never fill. His perfect world was a lie. His success was meaningless. His only true legacy was a little girl he barely knew, a little girl who had been raised in his own house by a woman he had abandoned. The weight of the truth was a physical thing, a crushing pressure on his chest. He staggered back, his hand coming up to his head. He had looked for her for years, hired people to find her. All the while she was living in his house. The irony was a cruel, perfect blade. The truth, in all its simplicity and complexity, was finally here. The girl was her daughter, but she also carried his blood. He stood in the middle of his perfect study, a man of power and wealth, utterly and completely in shock. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. After Amara's quiet, devastating confession, the world had tilted on its axis, and the only thing that felt real was the overwhelming weight of the truth. He looked at the girl again, no longer just a maid's daughter, no longer just a silent reminder of a past love. Now he saw his own blood, his own legacy, sitting at his table, a tiny reflection of himself. He saw her small, serious face, her delicate hands, and the way her hair curled, and a profound, unbearable grief welled up inside him, hot and sharp. His eyes, so long dry and focused on business, filled with tears. He couldn't believe that child, with her simple dress and quiet dignity, was a part of him. The weight of it was suffocating. He had built his life on control, on calculated risks, on logical decisions. He had built it on the belief that a successful man was one who was in command of every variable. But this was a variable he had never even considered, a child, his child. He had spent 2 decades believing he had lost a love, when in fact he had lost a family. The irony was a cruel, perfect punch to the gut. All his wealth, all his power, all his accomplishments felt like dust. They were meaningless. He was a man with a multi-billion-dollar empire, but he had failed at the one thing that truly mattered, being a father. He looked at her, and the tears began to fall freely, a silent torrent of 20 years of buried pain. He saw a million lost moments in her face. He saw the first time she smiled, the first time she took a step, the first day of school, the scraped knees, and the quiet moments of comfort. He had missed it all. He had been so busy climbing a ladder to a world he thought was important that he had failed to see the most important thing in his life. He saw the quiet, respectful way she treated the other children, and a fierce, protective love surged through him, an emotion he had never felt before. She was his. She was a part of him. He was a man who had made a name for himself, but he had no one to share it with. He had built an empire, but he had no one to leave it to. He had believed he was a man of destiny, when in reality he was a man who had lost his way. The truth was a sharp, brutal sword, cutting through the carefully constructed lies he had told himself for so long. He wasn't a tragic hero. He was just a fool who had been too busy chasing a mirage to see the reality that was right in front of him. He looked back at Amara, and his gaze was filled with a mix of awe and a profound, heartbreaking shame. She had done it all. She had raised their child, a beautiful, kind, and resilient human being. She had done it alone. Without his help, without his money, without his presence, she had protected their secret, not out of malice, but out of a desperate, quiet love. She had been the hero of this story, and he had been a supporting character, a ghost in his own narrative. He wanted to go to Nia, to hold her, to tell her everything, to tell her who he was, to tell her that he was her father, that he was sorry for the years he had missed. But he couldn't. He was a stranger. He was a ghost. He was just a man with a shattered heart and a face full of tears. The pain was too raw, too fresh, and the fear was too great. He was afraid of what she would think, what she would say. He was afraid of the look on her face when she realized the truth. He was afraid of losing her all over again before he even had a chance to know her. He knew what he had to do. He had to make things right. He had to be a part of her life, to protect her, to love her. He didn't know how, but he knew he had to try. He had to fight for her, to prove to her and to himself that he was worthy of her love. He had to build a new life, a new legacy, not of money and power, but of love and family. He had to atone for the years he had lost, for the mistakes he had made, for the life he had thrown away. He had to be a father finally. He looked at her again, the small, quiet girl, and the tears flowed faster. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that this child, his child, was a part of him. The silence in the study was a living thing, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on Mr. Caldwell. Amara had retreated, leaving him alone with the devastating truth, and now he was faced with a choice. It was not a choice between right and wrong, but between the two separate worlds he inhabited. He had to choose, acknowledge his daughter Nia to the world and face the scandal, the whispers, and the loss of his carefully cultivated reputation, or hide the truth, pretend the past had never happened, and continue living a lie to protect his flawless public image. The silence of the room, so often a sanctuary, now weighed on him with an unbearable pressure, a silent witness to the most important decision of his life. He walked to the large window, staring out at the manicured grounds of his estate. The perfect lawn, the pristine gardens, the stately trees, it was all a symbol of the life he had built, a life of flawless control and public adoration. This world, his world, was built on an image of success, of quiet power, and of a clean, unblemished past. To introduce a child he had never acknowledged, a child born to a woman he had long forgotten, would be to light a match to the very foundation of his life. The newspapers would have a field day. The tabloids would scream his name. His peers would whisper and judge. He would no longer be the powerful Mr. Caldwell, the man who had built an empire from nothing. He would be the man with a secret, a man with a past he had tried to erase. A part of him, the old part, the ambitious part, screamed for self-preservation. It told him to stay quiet, to offer Amara money, to provide for Nia in secret, but to never, ever let the world know. He could protect them both from the public eye, provide them with a life of luxury and comfort, all while keeping his reputation intact. It was the logical, the pragmatic, the safe choice. It was the choice the old Mr. Caldwell would have made in a heartbeat. The world he had built was a delicate house of cards, and a single truth could bring it all crashing down. But then, he, who thought of Nia, he saw her small, shy face, her serious expression, the way she held her fork. He saw her dignity, her resilience, her quiet strength. She was a living testament to a love he had abandoned, a testament to a life he had missed. Could he really deny her? Could he look at his own blood and tell her silently that she was not worthy of a place in his life? The thought was a physical pain, a crushing weight on his chest. He had already failed her once. He had left her and her mother to fend for themselves, to build a life from nothing. He had a chance to do the right thing, to be a father, to be a man worthy of her love. The weight of his own hypocrisy was staggering. He had spent his life chasing a reputation, a name, a legacy. But what was a legacy without a child to carry it on? What was a name without a family to call it their own? His empire was a hollow shell, a monument. To a man who had lost his soul, he had everything, and yet in that moment he realized he had nothing. He had always prided himself on his intelligence, on his ability to see the world for what it was. But now he saw that he had been blind. He had been a fool, chasing a phantom of success while the real treasure was right in front of him. He had told himself that his career was his destiny, but he had been wrong. His destiny was in the hands of a small, quiet girl who had no idea who he was. The silence in the room seemed to press in on him, forcing him to confront the two men he was, the man of power and prestige, and the man with a broken heart and a rediscovered child. The two were at war, a battle of wills that raged in the quiet of his study. He knew what the world expected of him. He knew what his reputation demanded. He knew what a safe, easy life would look like, but he also knew what was right. He had to be a father. He had to be a man. He had to face the consequences of his past and build a future that was worthy of his daughter. The choice was terrifying, but the alternative was a life of quiet, suffocating regret. He had to choose. The silence of the room, so heavy, so, with his indecision, seemed to hold its breath. The decision had been made in the silent chaos of his mind. The weight of his reputation, the fear of scandal, and the lifetime of regret all faded into nothing. The only thing that mattered was the small, quiet girl in the other room. With a heart that felt both broken and finally whole, he walked. He, out of his study, crossed the hall and approached the girl. She was sitting on a plush rug, a children's book in her lap, her small, serious face absorbed in the story. Amara was nowhere to be seen, having retreated to give him space. He knelt down, his elegant suit creasing as he lowered himself to her level. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just held her, a tentative, gentle embrace that was a lifetime in the making. For the first time in years, a profound and undeniable sense of purpose settled over him, and he found a real meaning for his life. He felt her small body in his arms, the gentle weight of her against his chest. She was so real, not a memory, not a ghost, but a living, breathing person. The shock on her face was palpable, her small body stiff and hesitant. She didn't know this man, this stranger who was holding her with such a desperate intensity. He felt a sharp pang of pain at the thought. He was a stranger to her. He had a lifetime of catching up to do, a lifetime of hugs and quiet moments and fatherly advice to give. He had missed it all. He had missed the first 10 years of her life, and he would never get them back. He held her tighter, a silent apology in his embrace. He felt the softness of her hair against his cheek, the fragile beat of her heart against his own. It was a physical thing, this connection, a profound and undeniable link that transcended wealth and reputation and a lifetime of mistakes. He had spent his life building an empire of steel and glass, but it was all just a hollow monument to a man who had nothing. This small, quiet girl, his daughter, was the only thing that mattered. She was the real legacy. She was the real meaning. Nia, initially rigid with surprise, slowly began to relax. The man's embrace was gentle, and despite her confusion, she felt a warmth radiating from him, a deep, quiet sadness that she somehow understood. She didn't know why he was holding her, but it felt strangely safe, a strange and unexpected comfort in a house filled with strangers. She put her small arms around his neck, a tentative, shy gesture of a child seeking comfort, and in that moment his world shifted. The man of power and wealth, the man of cold logic and sharp intellect, was gone. There was only a father who had found his child after a lifetime of searching. He thought of the pain he had caused, the years he had missed, the life he had thrown away. He had been a fool, chasing a dream that had turned into a nightmare. He had sacrificed the most important thing for an illusion of power. But here, in this moment, in this embrace, all the pain and all the regret dissolved into a single, profound truth. He had been given a second chance, a chance to be a father, a chance to be a man, a chance to be a person worthy of the love he had so carelessly thrown away. The feeling was overwhelming, a sudden all-consuming sense of purpose that filled the hollowed-out space in his heart. He had always believed that success was the key to happiness, that wealth and power were the measures of a man. But he had been wrong. The true measure of a man was the love he gave, the family he protected, the legacy he built with his heart, not with his bank account. He had spent his life living a lie, and now he was finally ready to live the truth. He held her for a long time, the silence of the room a testament to the profound, life-altering moment. He was no longer the man he had been. He was a new man, a father, and he was finally home. He had no idea what the future held, what the challenges would be, what the world would say. But none of that mattered. He had his daughter in his arms, and for the first time in years, his life had a real and undeniable meaning. For more stories that matter, join our community. Subscribe to Say Tales.